Hello, and welcome to episode 34 of the Refining Rhetoric podcast. I'm your host, Robert Bortons. I'm excited that you are here with us today because my guest is Ken Sande. He is author of The Peacemaker. He founded an organization called Relational Wisdom 360, and he is going to share about emotional intelligence and give us some ideas and some tools to use to make sure that we are sharing the love of Christ with those around us when we're in sticky situations. Be sure to stay for our practice of the 15 tools of learning through current events and evaluating what's going on around us. And of course, we'll finish up with a crypto segment. So without delay, let's jump in.
Classical Conversation Studios presents Refining Rhetoric with CEO Robert Bortons, a podcast where faith, business, politics, and classical education meet. Join us as we use the classical tools of rhetoric to seek truth in every arena of life.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Refining Rhetoric. Today, my guest is Ken Sande. Ken is the founder of two organizations focused on preserving and transforming relationships: Peacemaker Ministries and Relationship Wisdom 360, also known as RW360. Over the course of his career as a lawyer and professional mediator, he has helped hundreds of conflicts in families, businesses, church, and legal settings get resolved. Classical Conversations Challenge B family should be especially excited to hear today's conversation because Ken is the author of the best-selling book, The Peacemaker, a biblical guide to resolving conflict. And that has sold over 500,000 copies, I'm told, in 20 languages, and is a recommended resource for parents and students enrolled in our Challenge B program. Ken, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. So good to be here with you.
So I'm curious to know, how did God lead you into this ministry around peacemaking? And I heard that you originally went to school to become a mechanical engineer. So what's the story?
Yeah, it's amazing how God takes us down some different roads to prepare us for his ultimate destination. Yeah, my first career was engineering, medical research and development, which I loved, but I missed Montana and wanted to come back to the Big Sky country. And also, my dad had been a lawyer and judge all of his life, so I'd always been intrigued with the practice of law. So I came back to Montana, went to law school, and thought I'd get into products liability or something like that. But right out of law school, I learned about a concept called Christian conciliation. And it's the Christian Legal Society, a National Fellowship of Christian Attorneys, that come up with the idea. And basically, it's to help Christians live out 1 Corinthians 6, where Paul says if you have disputes, rather than going into civil courts, turn to the church. There's wise, godly people in the church. So the minute I heard about that concept, my heart just leaped. I mean, I just thought, this is for me. That was 40 years ago and 41 years ago. And so I've been doing this ever since. I've seen God resolve, lawsuits between Christians, church splits, divorces, child custody, abuse, you name it, I've seen it. And I've seen God do things that would have been impossible in any other setting. So it's really been a joy.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate that about this ministry, or the ministries that you've started, is it really helps us live out our biblical worldview in real life. Because a lot of times you say you're a Christian, you want to be a Christian, but you're not sure what that really looks like. And you've helped us here at Classical Conversations, and of course, hundreds of thousands of people in different other groups live that out on a daily basis. So could you tell us, how did you end up starting these organizations, and how is Peacemaker Ministries different than Relational Wisdom 360?
Yeah, well, I started Peacemaker Ministries under the umbrella of the Christian Legal Society, but eventually became a separate 501c3. The new ministry that I'm working with now, back in 2012, after 30 years of resolving conflict, you could say putting out the fires of conflict, I thought, I think I'd rather focus on how can we prevent conflict, how to prevent the fires of conflict in the first place. And so that was just a change of direction. We'd been talking about a transition already for leadership at Peacemaker. So I stepped down and moved into this new field. And basically, it's developing a concept we call relational wisdom which is a biblical form of emotional intelligence. And it's an area that I had not spent a lot of time focusing on up till that point. Sort of the standard Christian perspective is if you just get your doctrine right and your theology right, then everything else falls into place. And I think too much we just ignore the fact that God made us as emotional creatures. And so I just began studying a lot of the neurology, human neurology, how our emotions ebb and flow, what triggers them, how we can control them. And so we developed a way of bringing in good sound neurology, marrying it to some good sound theology, and now have a paradigm or a systematic theology for emotional intelligence, relationships, and we're integrating all that with the peacemaking. So it's really added a very robust element to the peacemaking I've been doing for 30 years.
So if I get this right, it's peacemakers are how do we handle conflict after it's occurred? And then Relational Wisdom 360 is how do we stop it from occurring in the first place? Is that kind of boiling it down?
Ideally, we call it getting upstream of conflict. And believe me, it's helped me a lot. There's things that I used to do that would irritate or disappoint or provoke my wife. And as I've studied RW, I've learned to read my wife better, understand my wife better. It's made a huge difference just in our relationship with our children, our grandchildren. And we're now teaching these concepts all around the world.
So what is emotional intelligence for maybe those who don't know about or maybe are hearing that idea for the first time?
Yeah, good question. The term was coined in 1925. Nothing much happened with it till 1995 when a man named Dan Goleman wrote a best-selling New York Times book called Emotional Intelligence. And then it really took off. And basically what emotional intelligence is your ability, and I would say it's your God-given ability to read your own emotional state and manage it in a constructive way. And then also to read the emotions of other people and use that information to manage those relationships. So be specific. If I am getting angry or irritated, my body's going to send me cues or like early warning signs. And as I learn to read those signs and I realize I'm starting to feel irritated right now, I'm starting to feel angry right now. And what I usually do then is I often say or do something I later regret. So what's a better way to channel this energy or this emotion in a constructive direction? Same thing with reading other people, body language, tone of voice, all sorts of things that send us signals. And as we get better at reading that information, we can respond to people in a much more empathetic, compassionate, and constructive way. And I've just realized emotion is like the wind to a sailboat, if you will, Robert. It's what moves us in life. And even Jesus himself was moved by emotion. He saw people who were hungry. He was moved by compassion to feed them. He saw people who were like sheep without a shepherd, and he was moved by his emotions. The word emotion actually comes from a word that means move. That's what emotions do. God gave us emotions to move us to things. And we want to help people to channel and harness the power of those emotions in a constructive way.
That's wonderful. And I know you came and spoke to our group a while back. I can't remember if it was like 7 or 8 years ago, I think, and taught us some of these tools and worked through some of these. So what I remember is being self-aware, other aware, and God aware. Are those 3 things that I'm remembering correctly?
That is correct. That's the essence of our paradigm. Secular emotional intelligence just focuses on being self-aware. What am I feeling? Other-aware. What are other people feeling? What we've added is that God component. What is God in this situation? Where is he? What does he want? What's his character? What's his purposes? And by getting my focus back up on God, it helps me to manage the rest of my relationships in a more constructive way as well. So those are 3 things: God-aware, self-aware, other-aware.
And what are the 6 relational disciplines that you teach through the materials at RW360?
Yeah, it's dividing each of those dimensions, God, self, and other, into 2 parts. And one is the awareness component. God aware, what do I know about God, who he is, what he's like, what his purposes are. Self-awareness, what do I know about myself, my hopes, my dreams, my current emotions, what tempts me, what triggers me. How well do I know myself generally and in the moment? And then other aware is, what do I know about other people? What's important to my wife? What is meaningful to her? How can I love her, etc. And then that's the awareness component. The other component is engagement or action. And given them what I know about God, how do I engage or respond? Faith, trust, hope, obedience, worship. Given what I know about myself, how do I discipline myself, control myself, use my voice, my actions, my resources in constructive ways? Given what I know about another person, how do I serve them, love them, minister to them, console them, sometimes even lovingly confront them, help them to break free from sin? So the 6 skills: God aware, God engaged; self aware, self engaged; other aware, other engaged. And you can literally not find a verse in the Bible that doesn't fit in one of those categories, because all of life is basically about loving God with all of our heart, mind, strength, and soul, loving others, engaging others as we love or engage ourselves. So in those 2 great commandments Jesus summarized is basically the essence of relational wisdom: loving God, loving others as ourselves.
That's wonderful. Is there one of those that you say, hey, if you can only work on one, or if there's one thing to learn first, is there one that you point to, like, hey, work on yourself first, or you really got to get your relationship with God right, or pay attention to what others are feeling?
Right. I asked my son that years ago when I was first teaching this material, and he was still a teenager. And he thought for a moment. He said, well, Dad, it's got to be God aware. If we know who God is and what he's like, then doesn't everything flow from that? And in one sense, that's very true. Having said that, though, when we put people through our training, part of the process is to help them identify one area, one of those 6 skills that God may be calling them to work on, especially today. So you might have someone who's fairly well self-regulated, self-aware, but he doesn't read other people very well. So you'd want to really focus in on how do you develop better skills of reading body language, tone of voice. I mean, we communicate in French just with our eyes. So just to focus in on one of those 6 skills for 30 days, and it's amazing in 30 days how much you can change.
Ken, are there some simple ways that someone can improve these skills?
Absolutely. As I said earlier, we want to be neurologically rigorous, theologically rigorous, but you can't open up a book and read 10 pages when you're right in the middle of a relational crisis. So what we love to do is take rigorous research, thinking, evaluation, but simplify it down into very simple acrostics. And I love acrostics. And so in each of those major skill areas, we've developed an acrostic. For example, SOG, SOG, is the overarching thing. In any relational situation, we want to say, God, help me to be self-aware, what's going on in me, other-aware, reading other people, and most of all, God-aware. How can I serve and glorify you in this situation? So just SOG encompasses the whole paradigm. But you can focus in on each of those 3 dimensions more rigorously with 3 other acrostics. GPS is if you want to be better, more God-aware and God-engaging. To G is glorify God in all situations. The main question is, how do I please and honor the Lord in this situation? Glorifying God. P, pursue God. Am I in his word? Am I in prayer? Am I Christian fellowship, reading good books, looking for good examples, people in my life where I'm actively pursuing God? His word says, you will seek me and you will find me when you seek me with all your heart. And then S stands for serve God. In any relational situation, you're not sure whether to go to the left or the right or what to do. If you default to how can I serve the Lord, you're going to probably be on safe ground. So GPS, glorify, pursue, serve. That's the God-aware segment. If I want to become more self-aware, self-engaging, managing myself, my own emotions, my own actions, even my own sinful tendencies more, we say you need to learn to read yourself, R-E-A-D. Recognize and name the emotion. What am I feeling right now? I'm feeling frustrated, irritated, excited, whatever it might be. But learn to read your emotions and name them. E is evaluate. Why am I feeling this way? What's going on inside of me? James 4:1 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? So is there some desire moving me right now that I'm not really consciously aware of? I need to be, jealousy, fear, whatever it might be. A is anticipate. anticipate the consequences of giving into this emotion. Okay, I'm irritated with my 15-year-old, and I'm tempted to just blurt out some expression of my frustration. Is that really going to help? Probably not, especially if I do it with an angry voice. So I anticipate the consequence. And then D is I'm going to direct or channel that emotion in a constructive direction. So I'm angry at my 15-year-old. I read myself. Instead of blurting out something, I take a breath and I say, Jeff, I'm feeling real frustrated right now, and I do not want to speak to you in anger because that would not be helpful to you and be a sin against God. I'm going to take just a minute to walk around the block, pray, and talk to the Lord. And when I get back, we'll sit down, we'll have a conversation. But just getting away from it for a few seconds, even a few minutes, helps me to calm down, to engage my whole mind, not just my emotions, but my will, my logic, my reasoning, to pray about it. So READ, recognize, evaluate, anticipate, and direct. And then the third or the fourth acrostic is if I want to get better at reading other people, understanding them, I need to learn how to serve other people, SERV. And that means smile at people. And that's not just a placeholder, that's enormous. Our countenance sends a message to people. E is to explore and empathize, to learn how to ask deeper questions other than just, hey, how's the weather these days? Empathy is developing a God-given capacity for compassion and understanding and consolation. And those are skills and character qualities we can develop. R is reconcile, is to sense when there may be a stranger, someone else, and how do I go to that person, confess and forgive and negotiate. Maybe I'm called by God to be a reconciler in someone else's relationship. Two of my coworkers are at odds with each other. Maybe I'm the one God wants to step in to be a peacemaker. And most of all, reconciles knowing when God has prepared someone's heart for the gospel, that they can be reconciled to God through the gospel of Christ. And then E sort of summarizes that whole acrostic, which is to encourage. Encourage. And to encourage means to inspire, to lift up. The metaphor we use, think of yourself as being wind under the wings of an eagle. Eagles get up to 10,000 feet in the air because they fly around until they find warm updrafts, thermals. And my prayer every time I go out, whether it's to a doctor's appointment or a store or whatever, is say, Lord, please give me grace today to be reading other people, sensitive to their needs, that everyone I meet, I'm going to put wind under their wings. And that could be the barista in the coffee shop that I just thank her for the nice coffee, chat with her about her job. There's so many ways we can draw people out and figure out things in their life. I'll give you a simple illustration. Vivid one of this whole thing, Robert. Last week, I was in Alabama. We were driving. We stopped at a gas station to get gas. My wife walked in to get a Coke, and as she approached the counter, this young man clerk said, "I've made a complete mess of my life." First words out of his mouth.
Wow.
After 15 minutes, he opened up his heart, shared his distress. He'd been thinking of killing himself, and I think the reason he opened up was my wife has this beautiful, friendly, warm, smiling countenance. He just read her as a compassionate person. She was able to witness to him, get his name and phone number. We gave it to a friend we had dinner with an hour later. And within minutes after dinner, my friend went to the gas station, introduced himself to this young man, invited him to his church. He's going to the men's group this week. And it's because Corlett was smiling, this warm countenance, this friendly countenance. And where that should come from is, Lord, give me love for people. I don't want to just manufacture a facial expression. Give me love for people, the barista and the clerk and the nurse and the technician. That when I see them, I feel the love of Christ for them. And that will come through in our countenance, our words, our conversation.
That's a beautiful story. I know one of my mentors, whenever he goes out to eat, he almost always asks the lady or gentleman serving him and says, "Hey, we're going to pray for this meal. Is there something you'd like me to include while I talk to the God of this universe?" And it's amazing what he gets out of people. And sometimes they break down and cry or tell about something that's going on in their life. And so it's
great idea.
Something to try to be more intentional for myself.
Yeah.
So in Challenge, we recommend The Peacemaker, and it's a book that we read. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well today. So what are the 4 G's of peacemaking and the 7 A's of confession. And can you tell us a little bit about those tools?
You bet. As I said, I like acrostics. They make it easy to remember the key points of what we're trying to be applied or to live out in our lives. So the 4 G's is basically a systematic theology for conflict resolution. G number 1, glorify God. In any situation, my goal is to please and honor the Lord. I'm reflecting the love of Christ, the wisdom of Christ to the people around me. Second G is to get the log out of your own eye. Take responsibility for my contribution to the conflict before I try to point out what the other person's done wrong. Third G is to gently restore, that if there's a way that I can help another person see how he contributed to a conflict, and I can speak to him with kindness and love and compassion in such a way that instead of getting defensive, he actually says, thank you. I appreciate you helping me to see that. So gently restore. And the fourth G is go and be reconciled. How do I go to the other person and work through the process of forgiveness and also negotiation? Maybe there's a substantive issue here that we need to still resolve even once we're personally reconciled. So glorify God, get the log out of your own eye, gently restore, go and be reconciled. And people familiar with their Bible know that those phrases are actually right out of Scripture.
Absolutely. And then the hard part,
you asked about
confession.
The 7 A's of confession.
Yeah.
Confession. I've listened to thousands and thousands of confessions in my life. Quite a few of them pretty lousy. That's why people came to us, I guess. We tend to say, if I've done something to offend you, then I'm sorry. And that word if is fatal because it means I don't really know that I've done anything wrong, but I can see you're upset until you get some token apology. You won't give me peace. So here's your token apology. I don't know what I did, so I can't tell you what I'm going to do or differently, but will you forgive me? I mean, it's worthless. It's worthless. Don't ever use the word if in a confession. So we talk about 7 A's, and what those 7 A's are basically to acknowledge everyone involved, to address everyone involved. We need to confess to God. If it's just to one other person, just that person. If my sin has affected a group of people, if a pastor in the pulpit says something really inappropriate, he may have to get up in front of the church next Sunday and confess to the whole church who was impacted. A good motivation to not sin in front of a whole bunch of people, I'll tell you that. The second G is to avoid if, but, and maybe, all the ways we try to minimize or excuse our sins. Just take those words out of your vocabulary when you're confessing. Admit specifically both what was going on in my heart, what was the desire that had grown into a demand that made me do something that hurt you, and then also the actions. I confess that I was just really self-absorbed today and just wanting my agenda to go forward. I spoke to you sharply, and I know that must have hurt your feelings. Acknowledge the hurt. Acknowledge how your actions affected the other person. This is something I found my wife, especially, if she finds it really helpful when she believes that I understand how I impacted her. That helps a lot in the forgiveness process. To accept the consequences. If I've broken something, I need to replace it. If I've spoken falsely or slandered somebody, I need to go and correct that, admit that, and correct the record. Whatever it takes to try to make that other person whole. The 6A is to alter your behavior. With God's help, next time, this is what I will do differently. And please hold me accountable for it. And then the final A is to ask for forgiveness after you go through that. Now, I always qualify. I say, don't turn that 7 A's into a pharisaical checklist. I've tried that. And my wife just looks at me and says, that sounded pretty mechanical to me. It needs to be heartfelt and sincere, but I think the more serious the sin, the more damage it has caused, the more we need to really make sure we give a thorough confession. I've walked a lot of marriages on the brink of divorce because of adultery, for example, through this process. And it's got to be more than just words. It's got to be heartfelt. There's got to be a commitment for counseling and getting to the root of it. But the starting point in turning people back from a divorce is going to be a heartfelt confession.
What if you don't feel like it? You have any techniques for helping someone who knows that they've done wrong, but they still seem to be in that rut
of the behavior?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're not wanting to apologize.
Oh yeah. Well,
They haven't gotten to the point. They're like, I know I've done wrong, but I can't face that person yet.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, and you have to pray. I mean, the Holy Spirit has to be involved in this thing. There's just so far we can go on human effort. So there's been times I knew I did something wrong, and I was reluctant. Just pride, selfishness kept me, hesitant to do it. Say, Lord, forgive me. I'm so proud. I'm so determined at my own self-righteousness. Forgive me, God, for minimizing the gospel. Jesus has paid for all of my sins. So I would really turn to the Lord and talk to him, a heartfelt way about the obstacle, where your heart is, and everything else. If you see it in the other person, to pray for that person earnestly before you go and see them, that the Lord would soften their heart. One of the things I found, Robert, when we call it the golden result, and it's a corollary to the golden rule, which is do to others what you would have them do to you. The golden result is other people will usually treat you the way you treat them. That's not always, but usually. And if I go to somebody, I'm in a conflict, and I blame them for it, they will blame me back, typically. But if I go to somebody and I say, I need to ask you forgiveness for what I did, I would say 80-90% of the time that I've done that personally or been in a mediation, the response of the other person is, well, now hold on a minute, it wasn't all your fault. I did this, etc. And it just shows the wisdom of Jesus' teaching in Matthew 7, where he says, first get the log out of your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to help your brother get the speck out of his eye. If we start with our own sins, confessing and acknowledging, it's amazing how much that helps the other person to do the same thing.
I love it. And I know it works, and I've seen it firsthand.
Yeah.
So as you help people resolve conflict, you start Relational Wisdom 360 to help people not need to get it resolved by stopping it before it happens. But do you see a common thread or common cause to issues that seem to get to a point of needing peacemaking?
Yeah, it's called sin.
We all got it.
And it comes in many shapes and sizes. Throughout history, you can read the Bible, you can read history books, you see these common threads of pride, greed, lust, anger, selfishness, vengeance, all these things that fuel human conflict. And I'm grateful that God wrote the Bible as such an authentic and transparent book. We see that in the heroes of the Bible. Even King David, man after God's own heart, stumbled badly. I think in our day and age, it seems like over the last few years, the intense polarization of politics, healthcare issues, wrapped around the COVID crisis, masking, social distancing, all that, all the woke movement, canceling people. My perception is that those sort of ripped off a veneer of civility in our society. 4 or 5 years ago, most people agreed you shouldn't just attack somebody verbally publicly just because they disagreed with you. And today it's almost raised to an art form, and people just feel a real license to speak so harshly, judge people, cut them off. And I think Christians really need to redouble our efforts, that we would be the ones who speak with gentleness, with kindness. We certainly want to pursue justice and righteousness. We want to defend the weak, anyone who's under oppression, physical or some kind of abuse, to be sure. But that's going to be the theme of our national conference this November, is just equipping Christians to engage other people in constructive ways in a highly polarized culture. How can we ask questions? How can we seek to understand? How can we promote reasonable dialogue and try to take those conversations back into a reasonable direction?
Do you feel like social media has amplified it? Do you blame that, or do you blame just other aspects?
Well, there's no question that social media has contributed to it, because the one thing we know is people will say things on social media that they would not say to a person face to face. And it used to be we had to communicate a lot face to face, or even at least on a phone call with somebody, tone of voice, we could hear them, get an instant response. And I mean, there's study after study shows that people are much less inhibited about what they say. And so I think social media has contributed to it dramatically.
Yeah. I'm 6'2", 220, so I'll pretty much say whatever I want to your face too. I'm teasing. Yeah, it's a crazy world out there. What
Yep.
I mean, Peacemaker is awesome. Relational Wisdom 360 is a great resource. But what are ways that you build up your knowledge? Are there authors or books that have made an impact on your ministry that if someone wanted to dig deeper in, that they too could reference or read?
Sure. Well, first, I'd like to point them to our resources and come to our website, because we've got
Sure.
books, online courses, group study sets, and all these things. And that for somebody who wants to dig into these issues, I'd encourage them to start there to be sure. Um, Personally, the people I've read over the years that specifically address these things would be a lot of the authors at the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation. Ed Welch, Paul Tripp, David Paulison, now Alistair Groves is the new executive director. Those are outstanding books. It's the best counseling organization out there, in my opinion. There's other books that are coming out now. Brian Borgman, who was a keynote speaker at our conference last year, pastor in Nevada, excellent book on feelings and faith, which is one of our required reading for our training and certification program, actually. And I'm always on the lookout. There's a new book sitting on my desk called The Voice of the Heart, and about emotions. I think this is an area most Christians have not done adequate thinking and studying about: is how did God make us as emotional creatures? How have those emotions been corrupted by the fall? And how can I appropriate the power of the gospel to redeem my emotional capacity, so that in any situation, I'm taking every emotion, thought, word, and action captive to Christ?
That's wonderful. I have one of the Christian Counseling Education Foundation books on my desk, and it's, I think, about 3 times as big as the Bible. So I would definitely recommend everyone go to Ken, who's done all the reading and gotten all the best parts out of these materials and his resources. You've mentioned your national conference a couple of times. Is that something that's special invite only, or could anyone listening to this sign up, or is it just for like pastors and clergy? Who's that
Oh
for?
no, it's for anybody. We would be delighted to have them come. It's going to be held here in Billings, Montana. Montana is the porch of heaven, so it's a great place to come to visit. It'll be November 1 through 4, and you can go to our website and there's information there. But you don't need to wait till then. If you go to our RW Academy, you'll find a lot of training there on how to teach these materials, lead small groups, how to coach others through conflict, how to be a conciliator. And it goes all the way from just sort of basic conversational type applications with a friend over a cup of coffee, all the way up to professional certification. There's people are making a living as certified conciliators using our resources. But we especially encourage church leaders, to be sure, because they impact so many people. So they would be a prime target for our online training and also for the conference itself.
That's wonderful. We're almost done. Is there any new projects or new materials that you're working on right now that you can share with our audience?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. Yeah, two that I'm really particularly excited about. One is we're working on an arrangement with the Pentagon to bring training to military chaplains around the world, and I'm thrilled with that. They impact 2 million service personnel in the United States Armed Forces. So if you know someone in the service, you can point them to our website. But the other thing is a program we're just now putting the finishing touches on called the Marketplace Professional Development Program. That's how Christian business owners can bring our teaching. And we have a secular version of our material called Values-Based Relational Wisdom. So it's secular. It doesn't have all the religious language and Bible verses, but it's where the Christian business owner can bring this training into his company, provide this training to employees to improve their relational skills, their conflict resolution skills. But even more importantly to me is there's multiple links in the material that employees can voluntarily click on if they're curious, that will take them to the gospel. And I just know a lot of Christian businessmen who really would like to find some way to give their workers the opportunity to encounter the gospel of life in Christ. And I'm really excited about this as we're starting to work with companies that can do this and actually lead people to Christ. And one of the things is when an employer buys access to our course for an employee, the employee gets 3 free access codes to the online course for his or her family, because we want to see their families strengthened as well. So we're just putting the finishing touches on that. If people want to sign up for the blog on our website, we'll announce that when it rolls out later this spring.
Well, that sounds like a great resource. I'm sure I know plenty of business owners that would love to have something like that for their employees. So be sure to let our team know once that's released, and I'll be on the lookout as well, so I can let some of my friends know about that.
Good. Thank you.
Well, Ken, thanks so much for being on the show today. If our listeners want to learn more about you, Peacemakers Ministry or RW360, can you let them know again, one last time, what are those websites and any social media platforms that they can come connect with you on?
Yeah, it'd be just the main website would be rw360.org, rw360.org, and they can link to everything else from there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ken. We'll see you soon.
Thank you, Robert. Privileged to be here. Good to see you.
Now let's continue to practice our 15 tools of learning. Of course, we have the 5 core habits of grammar, the 5 common topics of dialectic, and the 5 canons of rhetoric. And we're going to practice this with Illinois State Senator Willie Preston. He says, city must examine COVID-era policies. This Chicago Democrat sounds alarm as 55 schools report no proficiency in math or reading. Very serious. This is the headline from Fox News. And of course, you can look at the articles in the show notes. But first, let's talk about knowing the appropriate word. So no proficiency, what does that mean? That means 0. So when they did the end of grade test, exactly 0 students in the entire school were rated proficient based on their grade level in reading or math. Not 1, not 9, 0. So that also is a comparison. So what is the national comparison numbers for that? Well, that's similarly not good. Of course, that changes year in and year out, but typically it's less than 50% of students in the United States are proficient. Of course, you think someone's in school for 12 years and reading and math are kind of vital for being successful as an adult and human and in this world. And the fact that so few get those basic skills despite spending the vast majority of their lives in school is very sad. And for us, really invention in the 5 common topics of rhetoric, asking of the questions through the 5 common topics. If we want to make sure that our kids are not in this boat, we have to really consider what are our options. How do we define a good education? How do we compare educational options? What's the relationship between student teacher? What circumstances do we find ourselves in? And what's the testimony of what we see others who have become proficient in reading and math? So for us as classicalists and as Christians, we should see this and be alarmed and realize that the government schools, you can't reform something that was not designed by God in the first place. And I think the best thing for us to do is to pull our kids out and look for classical Christian opportunities. One of the things that we're trying to educate people on is school vouchers. So if you're a homeschool parent, would you accept government funds to help with your child's education cost? As tempting as it may sound to accept funds like this, which go by many names like ESAs and school vouchers, there's more that lies beneath the surface of these government programs, and homeschool families need to stay informed. There's a saying that goes, with the shekels come the shackles. Meaning, when the government uses taxpayer funds to fund organizations, individuals, or movements, government's attempt to change, control, or influence the recipients always follows. These funds are the stepping stones to increase government regulations in private and homeschool, which threatens the freedom these educational models have fought to protect. While homeschooling has become more mainstream over the years, we need to recognize that there are still attempts to influence the education of our children. Therefore, we urge you not accept school vouchers or ESAs or any form of government funding for home education. To learn more about school vouchers and other ways the government funds private education, you can find articles, podcasts, and other helpful resources on this topic at classicalconversations.com/vouchers. That's classicalconversations.com/vouchers for more information. All right. We are talking about crypto today and the bills in Congress. One of the things that the Constitution actually lets our Congress do is figure out how to issue money and regulate some of those aspects. So it is important that we stick to the Constitution. Tom Emmer, he's the Republican House Majority Whip. He presented a bill that would prohibit the Federal Reserve from issuing or to utilize a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, to govern monetary policy. Now, we've talked about this before. Will did on the show about the CBDC and the dangers of those, the potential dangers where a government agency could not let you purchase a certain thing or even cut you off because there's an ID associated with your digital wallet, and just the dangers of the government kind of just really monitoring every single transaction that we do as citizens. So his bill would prohibit the Fed from issuing a CBDC directly to anyone, bar the Fed from using CBDC to implement monetary policy and control the economy, and require the Fed's CBDC projects to be transparent to Congress and the people. So if you don't know, the government is studying what a CBDC, central bank digital currency, would be like, and trying to determine if that's something that they should do. I actually sent a message to Congressman Dan Bishop, who I've had on the show before, and he said that Mike Lee has an even better bill that would prohibit the Federal Reserve from indirectly creating a CBDC. So while Tom Emmer's bill would make it so that they couldn't directly do it, Mike Lee's bill, he's a Republican out of Utah, would not let them do it directly or indirectly. So in other words, the government right now, if Tom Emmer's bill passed, would allow them to, pay someone else to do that act for them. So I think we will see some sort of regulation and different things coming out of Congress over the next 3, 4, 5 years on crypto. Some of it might be good, some of it might be bad. And I think this is important as citizens of the United States and people who want to be free and see the dangers of a currency that's being constantly debased, money being printed out of thin air and giving to friends of the state. While all of us get our, we get a $1,200 check, and big business and banks get billions and trillions of dollars. We know that that is not in line with a biblical worldview. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the future. But if we don't have sound money, then every time we make a transaction, we are not necessarily entering into a agreement with someone with equal weights. So it's important that we do have sound money, and it's important that Bitcoin is around because it gives an opportunity for us to consider that and gives us an alternative from the current system. So that's why we want to be educated on crypto, and that's why it's important to be following the laws that are coming out of Congress. I hope you learned as much today as I did. Be sure to share this episode with someone who might need some relationship advice, and be sure to check out our episode next week.
Thank you for listening to Refining Rhetoric with Robert Bortons. Want more? Make sure to subscribe so you won't miss an episode. You can also follow us on social media to continue the conversation, and visit classicalconversations.com/rhetoric to find out how you can join a local homeschool community.